Vice President and General Counsel of the Family Leader, and I get the privilege of introducing another warrior to you, a close friend of mine and a great ministry partner. Doug Napier is Senior Vice President and General Counsel of Alliance Defending Freedom, or ADF for short. Doug and I became friends many years ago when he still lived here in Iowa, and when we both attended Alliance Defense Fund training for volunteer attorneys. ADF trains thousands of Christian lawyers around the world to defend life, religious liberty, and God's design for marriage and the family. Doug and I were so moved by the ADF ministry that he left his third-generation law practice in Iowa to become right-hand man to Alan Sears, president of ADF in Arizona. And I started the Family Leaders Public Interest Law Firm, the Iowa Liberty and Justice Center, about the same time, with the help of 20 other ADF-trained Iowa Christian attorneys. Doug and ADF have become the largest public interest law firm in the world. That is the largest firm that isn't insane. Using Del Tactic's definition, there is a larger one. I can't bear to say its full name, but its consonants are ACLU. But while the ACLU defends people, seriously, like late-term abortionists, Satanists, and even child pornography distributors, ADF defends people like Dick and Betty Udgard from Grimes, Iowa. I don't know if you saw the news. Dick and Betty run a wedding service, and this last week a homosexual couple has threatened to sue them, and ADF and our ministry are helping them because we and Dick and Betty don't believe that the government has the right to force them as private citizens to actively participate in a homosexual quote-unquote wedding. Doug's a great lawyer. He's been on Fox and Friends, CNN, and the New York Times, etc. But most importantly, he is a humble, godly man who God is now exalting. Like the mighty warrior King David, he is a man after God's own heart. And like King David, he is a man whose hands have been trained for war. Please welcome Doug Napier.
Thank you for the Iowa Family Leader. I know many of you are shocked to know that there are Christian attorneys out there, let alone thousands of them, but I can vouch for the fact that they do exist. And this is a great event. You know it's great? You know it's great because the Iowa atheists came out to picket you, all 10 of them. And you know it's great that they're out there exercising their First Amendment rights, because the only difference between them and us is that they want to silence Christians, and what we want is a hearty debate between all people in the free market of ideas. So if you really want to drive them nuts as you're passing out of here, say God bless you, give them a thumbs up, go First Amendment. Well, as a native Iowan, it's always great to come home. I live in Arizona now, so it's nice to see what real trees look like. It's good to see my family. My family's here. My father, the third-generation law firm that I left, my former partners here, still talking to me though. So it's good to see him again and my brother. But what really brings me back here is to be around people who are the salt of the earth, who firmly believe in the values of faith, family, and freedom. So I want to start with a quick Iowa quiz. How many of you know what the state motto of Iowa is? Raise your hand if you know. Only a few of you. All right, for those of you who know it, say it with me. Our liberties we prize. that we will maintain. More importantly is, do you believe that motto? Or even more important than that, what are you willing to do to protect that motto? It's so important that we take these ideas of liberty and rights seriously. I remember learning that motto at Jackson Elementary School in Fort Madison, Iowa years ago. But I never had the thought at that time how serious the threat to our liberties and rights would become. Like you, I prize our God-given liberty. Liberty enshrined in our U.S. Constitution by our nation's founding fathers. And like you, I'm increasingly alarmed by the legal attacks on those liberties, and ultimately our rights by those who seek to impose a very different agenda on this great state and our nation. These are rights that were not conferred to us by mere men, or even by the founding documents drafted by men, but by the laws of nature and by nature's God. And when rights are given to you by God, there is no man, no judge, no legislature, and no president that has the right to take them away from you. What we are witnessing today is an increasingly hostile agenda that takes the words, "we the people," and twists them into, "we know what's best for you, people." And as we gather today, there's perhaps no greater manifestation of this "we know what's best for you" mentality than the battles to defend and protect marriage as the union between one man and one woman. What I want to do today is to make sure that if you truly prize liberty and you want to maintain your rights, then you will understand why preserving marriage as the union between one man and one woman is so critical. Because the marriage debate is not simply about marriage. Marriage is a religious liberty issue. Marriage is an economic issue. Marriage is an education issue. Marriage is a criminal justice issue. Marriage is a healthcare issue. Marriage is a rights of conscience issue. Marriage is a size of government issue. And what marriage is not, it is not merely a private relationship between two loving, committed people. And I guess now we have to say, or more than two, and maybe not just people. There's virtually no aspect of our culture that is not impacted or influenced by marriage. I also want you to go away with a clear notion that despite what you hear and see in our media and elsewhere, that universal and permanent same-sex marriage is not inevitable. That the forces against the family are fierce, and there are a lot of even well-intentioned people who have been hypnotized by the notions of equality and tolerance. But when you start pulling back the curtain on the true agenda against marriage, the importance of fighting for families becomes crystal clear. Of course, you've all seen this firsthand in the state, when in 2009 your state Supreme Court foisted upon you same-sex marriage. Of course, you let them know what you thought about that. And I know you felt the frustration of tangling with state legislators who will make sure that a ballot question on marriage never reaches the Iowa voters. And unfortunately, this battle has played out in state after state, ultimately reaching the United States Supreme Court this past June in two frightening decisions. We had the privilege of being co-counsel on one of those cases. But are you aware of what the United States Supreme Court recently said about you, about us, who still believe that marriage is a sacred union between a man and a woman? According to Justice Kennedy, our belief is nothing more than animus, an irrational desire to injure and demean those who would redefine and ultimately destroy marriage. Really? Is that what we are? Why don't you turn to the person on your right and say, "Hello, hater." What utter nonsense. Now, while the court acknowledged that on the one hand, quote, marriage between a man and woman no doubt had been thought of by most people as essential to the very definition of that term, end quote, it went on to abandon thousands of years of social norms to suggest a new insight, presumably an enlightened or evolved view, required the Supreme Court to strike down a law that was passed overwhelmingly by 342 members of the House, 85 senators, and a Democratic President, Bill Clinton. You know, that bipartisan bunch of bigots. Where did the court obtain its authority, let alone its clairvoyance, to accuse the legislative branch of this heinous collective motive of malice? Justice Scalia, who always provides us with the voice of reason, said, "It is one thing for a society to elect change. It is another for a court of law to impose change by judging those who oppose it hostis humani generis, enemies of the human race." This was a term used by Cicero to describe tyrants or the terrorists of the day. As I look out on this robust crowd today, I don't see the faces that could be called enemies of the human race. Do you? Instead, what I see are people who care deeply about the human race and who offer compassion as you seek to preserve the human race from self-destruction. I see people who care about the state and this nation and who are ready to engage and save the land we love. But we must engage. Yes, the battlefield can look daunting. We can look at the financial and the cultural and the political forces that we face and we can start to feel hopeless. But I suppose there were a lot of people in 1859 who would have never believed that within a decade they would see the end of slavery. Abraham Lincoln said, "The probability that we may fail in the struggle ought not to deter us from the support of a cause we believe to be just." But I don't believe for a second that there's a probability of failure, and neither did Lincoln. Look at the tremendous gains that we have made toward overturning the devastating impact of Roe v. Wade. When people of conviction come together, anything can be conquered. Andrew Jackson said, "One man with conviction makes a majority." If you will commit to prizing our liberties and maintaining our rights, we can and we will win. But we do need to survey the battlefield and assess the challenges ahead. Let me start by giving you a brief overview of where these primary threats to the family will come from. They're coming from our campuses. I remember back in my days at the University of Iowa in 1982, being bullied by homosexual activists simply for taking a moral stand on sexuality that opposed their agenda. They made death threats, and they compared me to Joseph Goebbels, that Nazi propaganda minister. These activists distributed and pasted flyers attacking me all over campus. What a propaganda program, how ironic. The threats are coming from lawmakers. We continue to see a constant attempt to reorder society by forging new draconian laws that force new behaviors and attitudes on all people. And the end result of their revolutions, or their evolutions, and their coercion, sadly, is always less freedom for everyone, including them. And they will advance their agenda under the guise of equality. One writer recently said, "Where equality is enthroned, freedom is destroyed." The threat is coming from our federal government. Listen to what Kai Feldberg, the presidential appointee to the Equal Opportunity Commission, which regulates your businesses, by the way, said. "We should not tolerate private beliefs about sexual orientation. It is essential that we not privilege moral beliefs that are religiously based over other beliefs." What beliefs? Your beliefs. She goes on to say, "In conflicts between religious liberty and sexual liberty should win." So in their world, the first protected fundamental right of our Constitution, the one spelled out in black and white in our First Amendment, religious freedom, must yield to this imagined, unstated demand that they've named sexual liberty. So much for your prized liberties. So much for your constitutionally protected rights. So much for the Constitution. More and more people are under legal attack, and more people feel that the government has turned against them. Non-discrimination laws are being used to silence Christians and compel conformity to their politically correct demands. We're being told by courts, by presidential mandates, by so-called human rights commissions to choose either between our faith and our livelihood. We're told we can't have both. This has got to stop. And if you still don't believe me, let me give you some specific examples from cases that our attorneys have litigated. Cases that demonstrate why people of faith and advocates of liberty must engage, must stand, and fight, and do it now. In New Mexico, we represented a young Christian photographer and private business person who was assessed nearly $7,000 by the state's Human Rights Commission for politely declining to use her artistic talent to photograph a lesbian commitment ceremony. In Washington State, a florist is the target of 2 lawsuits filed against her by the State Attorney General and the ACLU, respectfully declining to use her talent to beautify a same-sex wedding. In Colorado, a baker finds himself under legal fire for standing firm for his values and beliefs by choosing not to use his expressive talents to create a same-sex wedding cake. And at Eastern Michigan University, an honors counseling student was kicked out of her graduate program just weeks before graduation and denied her degree simply for asking that a client seeking advice for his homosexual relationship be referred to another counseling student. That client wasn't even aware of the request. And at the University of Illinois, a professor was fired for truthfully answering a question on Catholic teachings about marriage and homosexual behavior. And get this, this was in a class, a religion class, on Catholic doctrine. And you've already heard about the nice couple, the Mennonite couple in Grimes, Iowa, who refused to open up their business, which is in a restored Lutheran church, to host a same-sex ceremony. When the owner asked this question, can I have my beliefs without being ostracized? An activist blogger quipped, sure you can. Just make sure you don't lose faith once your business is ripped from your hands and you're neck deep in legal fees. This coming from the so-called tolerance crowd. So as you can see, the opposition has gone beyond mere toleration to the point where they demand our cooperation and subordination. They seek diversity by forcing conformity. So we must respond, and we must respond now. Let me make this very clear. This is not about bigotry. It's about biology and truth. It's not about frowning with disapproval on another form of love. It's about true love. It's not about condemning our friends who have made tragic choices and allowed themselves to be seduced by a self-destructive understanding of human sexuality. It's about condemning dangerous social experiments. But more than that, it's about protecting our children and protecting our families. It's about preserving the freedom that only comes to a society that does the right thing. And this is not only about the future of marriage in America, it's about the future of America. Our battle today is not much different than the Civil War that Lincoln faced. We too have a moral choice to make as a nation, and the choices we make today will determine the Iowa and the America that we have tomorrow. In an address to Congress in 1861, Abraham Lincoln remarked, "The struggle of today is not altogether for today. It is also for a vast future. With a reliance on Providence, all the more firm and earnest, let us proceed in the great task which events have devolved upon us." This is true for us today. We either fight or we forfeit. We either stand or we surrender. But if we don't fight, we clear the path for the government to begin an even more aggressive intrusion into our lives, including our churches and our businesses. Think Obamacare. If we don't fight, it means the rewriting of our grade school curriculum to replace the normal with the abnormal, the natural family with the modern family. If we don't fight, it means people of faith will be compelled to ignore their faith with further constraints on your freedom of speech and your religious freedom. In fact, it may even mean being disqualified from holding public office, as we saw with the Board of Regents here. But in Texas right now, there's a proposed ordinance that would disqualify anyone who expressed a biblical perspective on homosexual behavior from obtaining a city government contract for their business or from holding public office. I imagine Senator Cruz will have a few opinions about that. Don't be fooled. Those pressing for same-sex marriage and all that comes with it aren't looking for compromise. They're not interested in live and let live. Just ask the photographer the florist, the counseling student, the baker, the photographer, and our friends in Grimes. And the ones that eventually suffer the cost for these destructive demands will be our children and grandchildren. They will be the ones who will grow up without the love of a mother and father, and the unique nurturing role that both play in their development and emotionally healthy adults. They're the ones that are being targeted by a constant stream of propaganda that tells them that mommies and daddies aren't really that important. And of course, your own Supreme Court incredibly declared that you don't even have to have a mommy and daddy to have a child, that a same-sex couple can produce children. Well, I guess if you could rewrite the laws of marriage, you could rewrite the laws of nature too. Dr. Tackett, I assume that we could see them repeal the law of gravity as well. But it's our children who will be robbed. The most precious legacy we can give them, their freedom. Freedom to openly speak and to live out their faith in this culture. Yes, we face a daunting challenge, but it's not too late. I have great hope for the days ahead. And one of the reasons I have that hope is because I get to look out upon you, into a motivated, engaged crowd of Iowans who know what right is and what truth is, and you're ready to defend the truth. Because truth always triumphs. I may have left Iowa, but I have never abandoned it. I will continue to fight for the values of Iowans and the values of Americans everywhere. And I know that I can count on you to join me and join us, as I know Iowans don't shrink from a good fight, especially when the cause is as noble as liberty. You know, we've seen throughout history where we have faced crises after crises and tough odds. We saw it in Europe in World War II. We saw it in 1940 in Dunkirk, and 4 years later when we finally got a beachhead in Normandy. And during that time, everyone said, well, it's inevitable. We're going to lose the war. England was being bombed. Churchill was surrounded by ministers saying, seek the best compromise you can. But he would not listen to them. He didn't accept their advice. He knew that he could not compromise. And a German invasion like nationalized same-sex marriage today seemed imminent. But he knew it wasn't just about preserving the British way, or even the British way of life. He knew that in his own words, he was fighting for the survival of Christian civilization. And it was about the future of liberty itself. For Churchill, surrender was unthinkable. Failure was not an option. And today we have that same mindset. Failure is not an option. We have to establish our own beachheads. We have to take back freedom in the streets and the public square. Today, in our ongoing battle for marriage and religious freedom, our challenge is no less formidable, and our calling is no less clear. So let's establish those beachheads. Let's establish legal beachheads that will be created as we stand firm against attacks on our freedom of conscience. Beachheads in our schools that permit students to express their faith freely. Beachheads in our churches where pastors aren't censored by the IRS out of fear of losing their tax-exempt status. And beachheads in our businesses where we fight against the draconian Obamacare HHS mandate that seeks to make us complicit in the taking of innocent lives and against punitive so-called non-discrimination laws. And beachheads in our families where we fight for our own marriages and instill time-honored values in our children. We can create these beachheads, but only if we stand strong and we stand in unity. Surrender of marriage and liberty is unthinkable. We will not be broken, and failure is not an option. So please, stand with us to defend liberty in marriage. If we stand together, by God's grace, we can do great things. Let us all prize our liberties so that our rights can be maintained. God bless you.